Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome everyone. Today we're going to be talking about the Ural Mountain Mystery Part 5. Today we're going to be discussing the story of the Dyatlov Pass incident. The next theory that people would speculate of what had happened to the hiking crew of the Dyatlov Pass incident would suggest a condition called P-Block, or more commonly known Arctic hysteria, which is a dissociative disorder which would explain happened to the hikers, considering that it has 4 stages with social disassociation, shock, convulsions, and stupor and recovery. And most of these cases, people suffering from Arctic hysteria will be known to strip off their clothing in blizzard type weather and just succumb to their injuries. And considering how the hikers were all strung about down that particular slope, this would actually explain one part of the theory. And a second part of the theory would explain why most of the hikers did not have any of their clothes on. But unfortunately, this theory would be debunked, as well as the many others that had came to everyone's attention, as Arctic hysteria only mainly affects people or indigenous people of Arctic circles, and more specifically, mainly affects women in Arctic circles. And Arctic hysteria only happens to people who are in prolonged periods of Arctic type conditions. And the hikers on the Dyatlov Pass were actually experienced hikers that were used to these types of conditions. So therefore, this was also debunked. They would also suggest that maybe the hikers fell victim to methanol poisoning. Now, it's very true if the hikers were using a methanol heater to heat themselves, and if a gas leaked and they had absorbed some of the methanol, that would explain the similar symptoms as Arctic hysteria. But unfortunately, this theory would also be debunked, as most of the hikers were only using wood and fire to heat themselves and didn't have enough room to carry a methanol heater. So again, like the others, this theory was debunked. The next theory that people would speculate would be possibly the hikers were overtaken by catabolic winds. Now, catabolic winds normally happen typically in places of Arctic regions, typically in Antarctica, Alaska, and so on. And a lot of these winds happen where winds go down a downward slope. And considering that the campers were on a slope, this would have some truth to it. And one of the things that catabolic winds would have that makes it so dangerous is they can reach up to speeds up to 50 or 60 miles per hour, which would explain some of the injuries that some of the hikers had. But the question would be, if they would hear a sound of catabolic winds in the middle of the night, it would explain them cutting open the tent and running out without their clothes on and answering some of their questions. But it would also ask the questions, why were certain things intact, like the tent and the equipment? So this theory wasn't exactly debunked, but there wasn't much proof to confirm that it was catabolic winds or deny that it was catabolic winds. The next theory would start a very slippery slope down the conspiracy theory rabbit hole. In this theory, considering that we're talking about 1950s Soviet Union, that the team were encountered by KGB special forces. One of the reasons behind this theory would be because one of the hikers, Semyon Zolotorov, would have a very, very questionable military background. And one of the other reasons, considering that the KGB had something to do with what happened at the Dyatlov Pass, was they would actually do a DNA test on Seaman or Seaman's body, and would do this DNA testing by doing a DNA testing on what would have been his great-great-granddaughter. And the DNA test, the first time, would say that it was inconclusive or it was not a match. And in 2018, Russia would do a DNA test again, and this time would say that, oh, it was a match. So this is one of the many reasons why many people believe that the team was actually assaulted and assassinated by KGB. And considering the fact that many of the hikers would have very physical trauma type injuries that they would succumb to death to, and considering the fact that Seaman himself would have his neck completely crushed, would possibly explain that what had happened to the team. And they would suggest that Seaman was working undercover and was attempting to meet KGB over some radiation type material. And considering a lot of the students worked with radiation, this would explain a lot of questions. But again, even though it would explain a lot of questions, it would also pose another bunch of questions. And because there wasn't much proof to show that KGB was involved, this theory was quickly debunked. The next theory would probably be one of the more plausible explanations of what happened to the hikers on that night. The theory goes, in the middle of the night, the hikers would hear an avalanche due to catabolic winds, and in a rush, they would grab their knives and cut a side of the hull of the tents. Not even wasting any time to grab their clothes or equipment, scurrying down the slope to get to the forested area to find trees or any type of shelter to save themselves. Considering where the hikers were from the tent and how they were moving down the slope to the forested area, and how the other hikers at the very end were in an embankment at a makeshift shelter trying to survive the elements, this would be the more plausible explanation of what exactly happened to the hikers. And considering the fact that some of the hikers would have burn marks from trying to heat themselves, and one hiker would actually have flesh actually torn from his body that would be found on a tree trying to scale the tree. In 2018, they would reopen the investigation of the Dyatlov Pass incident, and a lot of people would come to the conclusion that the hikers unfortunately died due to an avalanche. But still, a lot of people would ask, if it was an avalanche, why was their equipment and tent still intact? What really happened to the hikers, unfortunately, is still unsolved to this day. That particular slope of the mountain would later be called the Dyatlov Pass, immortalizing their leader, Igor Dyatlov. They would even build a memorial for the 9 hikers that unfortunately lost their lives. And what actually happened to the 9 hikers on the Dyatlov Pass is still up for debate, as it still remains unsolved to this day. It could be a variety of reasons, but me personally, I truly believe it's a kind of a combination between catabolic winds and avalanche. As the hikers were strung about, something did spook them in the middle of the night to cut a hole in their tent and to run for cover as fast as possible, not wasting any time to get their clothes or even grabbing their equipment or food. Something had to scare them that quick. Now, military like KGB, yes, that would be a reason to scare them, but not as much as catabolic winds or an avalanche. And as far as the radiation, most of these kids were students that dealt with radiation on a daily basis, and the radiation evidence they found on their bodies were probably left there from when they were around radiation in school. But that's just my thoughts on it. So, until next time, take care of yourselves.